April 18, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The air is thick enough to drink, a suffocating blanket of heat and moisture that clings to the skin even before the sun has breached the horizon. Inside Barracks F, the darkness is filled with the rhythmic breathing of sleeping women. They are ghosts in a foreign land, German prisoners of war, their pasts an ocean away, their futures an unanswered question. For 24-year-old Greta Hoffman, the oppressive Louisiana night is not the source of her terror. The terror comes from the silence. A profound, unnatural stillness from within her own body. She lies rigid on the thin mattress, her hands resting on the swell of her belly, a protective gesture that has become second nature over the past 8 months. For weeks, this is where she has felt life. A flutter, then a kick, then the rolling press of a tiny foot against her ribs. It was her secret conversation, a promise of a future that defied the barbed wire and the watchtowers. It was the only thing that was truly hers. But for 2 days, there has been nothing. No kicks. No movement. Just a heavy, lifeless weight. Her training screams at her. Greta is not just a prisoner, she was a nurse with the Deutsches Rotes, the German Red Cross. She tended to shattered Luftwaffe pilots and mangled panzer crewmen on the collapsing Eastern Front. She knows the signs of life and the cold signals of its absence. She has tried everything she can think of in the secrecy of her bunk. She has shifted her position, gently prodded her abdomen, even drank the cold, brackish water from the camp well, hoping the shock would stir the child. Nothing. The silence remains, absolute and terrifying. You can feel the memory of the chaos that brought her here. The rumble of Soviet T-34 tanks chewing up the frozen earth outside a field hospital in Prussia. The frantic order to evacuate. The panicked retreat west, hoping to surrender to the Americans, not the Russians. Her capture was a blur of exhaustion and fear, her hands raised in surrender alongside weary Wehrmacht soldiers, boys who looked younger than her own brother. Then came the endless journey, the crowded transport ships, the stench of sweat and fear, the disorienting arrival in a land of impossibly green trees and suffocating humidity. Here, in this strange American purgatory, a fragile sense of safety had taken root. There were no artillery shells, no Stuka-dive bombers screaming from the sky. There was food, shelter, and a routine that dulled the sharp edges of trauma. The other women in her barracks, clerks, factory workers, fellow nurses, had formed a tight, resilient community. They shared stories, mended clothes, and spoke in whispers of home, of husbands and brothers they might never see again. They all watched over Greta, their pregnant sister in misfortune, a symbol of a life that had not yet been lost to the war. Now, that symbol is fading. The hope that had sustained her through the capture, the interrogation, and the humiliating voyage across the Atlantic is dissolving into a cold dread. She presses her ear to her own belly, a desperate, illogical act, listening for a heartbeat that she knows a human ear could never detect. She hears only the frantic pounding of her own. "My baby," she whispers into the darkness, the German words a prayer and a eulogy. "Mankind is tot. My child is dead." The thought is a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. This baby was conceived in a moment of stolen love, a brief reprieve from the war with a soldier whose fate she will never know. It is all she has left of that world. To lose it here, in this cage, surrounded by the enemy, is a cruelty beyond comprehension. The sky outside begins to pale, shifting from black to a bruised purple. The first stirrings of the camp can be heard, a distant cough, the creak of a floorboard. Soon, the guards will begin their rounds. The day will start, and she will have to move. She will have to pretend. But how can she carry death inside her? Another woman, Ilse, a sharp-eyed Berliner, stirs in the bunk next to her. In the dim light, she sees Greta's face, pale and streaked with silent tears. Ilse's expression softens from drowsiness to concern. "Greta? What is it?" she asks, her voice a low murmur. Greta can't form the words. She just shakes her head, a single, violent motion of negation. But Ilse understands. She has seen that look of primal fear on the faces of mothers in bombed-out cellars. She reaches out, her hand resting on Greta's arm. Greta finally looks at her, her eyes pleading. The decision is made. She cannot endure this alone. She cannot let her child's story end in this silent, secret horror. She must speak. She must turn to the very people who captured her, the men in uniforms that represent the destruction of her entire world. She must place her life, and the fading hope for her baby, into the hands of the enemy. The fear of what they will do is immense. But the fear of doing nothing is a torment she can no longer bear. The walk across the camp compound feels like a mile. Each step is a conscious effort, a battle against the leaden weight in her belly and the paralyzing fear in her mind. Ilse is at her side, a firm hand on her elbow, murmuring words of encouragement that barely penetrate the fog of Greta's dread. The Louisiana sun is climbing, already baking the red dirt, and the morning air is alive with the unfamiliar sounds of American voices, the easy drawl of the guards, the sharp commands of a distant drill sergeant. To Greta, it is the language of captivity. They approach the camp infirmary, a long, white-painted wooden building that looks like every other structure in this meticulously organized prison. But to Greta, it is an alien frontier. This is the domain of the enemy's medicine, the enemy's authority. A young American guard, a private barely out of his teens, stands by the door, a Springfield rifle resting casually in his arms. He watches them approach, his expression a mixture of boredom and suspicion. Ilse speaks for her, using the functional, heavily accented English they have all learned out of necessity. She is sick. The baby. She points to Greta's abdomen. No move. Today. No move. The guard's eyes flicker over Greta. He sees a pale, frightened woman, her prisoner's uniform hanging loosely over her pregnant frame. He's seen prisoners try all sorts of things to get special treatment or a break from work details. But there is a raw, authentic terror in Greta's eyes that gives him pause. He nods curtly and gestures them inside. The infirmary smells of antiseptic and floor polish, a stark contrast to the scent of pine and damp earth that permeates the rest of the camp. An American Army nurse, starched and severe, looks up from her paperwork. She listens to Ilse's explanation with an impassive face. "Wait here," she says, her voice flat, and disappears into an examination room. The minutes stretch into an eternity. Greta sits on a hard wooden bench, her hands clenched in her lap. Every instinct from her nursing training is now turned against her. She diagnoses herself with a brutal clarity. Placental abruption. Umbilical cord strangulation. Fetal distress leading to death. The clinical terms are a cold comfort, a fragile shield against the overwhelming grief. She is no longer a mother-to-be, she is a patient presenting with a catastrophic complication. Finally, the door opens. A man in an officer's uniform enters. He is tall, with weary eyes that suggest he has seen far more than any young man should. On his collar, the silver bars of a captain are visible. He is U.S. Army Captain John Miller, one of the camp's physicians. He doesn't smile. He simply motions for Greta to follow him. Inside the small examination room, he asks questions in slow, deliberate English. When did the movement stop? Is there any pain? Any bleeding? Greta struggles to answer, her own English faltering under the stress. "Zweitage," she manages. 2 days. No kick. She shakes her head, a fresh wave of tears threatening. Nichts. Nothing. Captain Miller listens, his expression unreadable. He tells her to lie on the examination table. His touch is professional, detached, as he palpates her abdomen. He then reaches for a fetoscope, a simple listening device. He presses the cold metal bell against her skin, moving it from spot to spot. The silence in the room is absolute, broken only by the sound of Greta's ragged breathing. He moves it again. And again. He closes his eyes, concentrating, listening for the faint, rapid rhythm of a life that should be there. He finds only silence. You watch his face. You see the subtle shift in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. He doesn't have to say a word. Greta, watching him, knows. She has seen that look on the faces of doctors in Germany when they had to deliver terrible news. It is the look of professional finality, the moment when hope is extinguished by medical fact. He straightens up, removing the fetoscope. He avoids her gaze for a moment, making a note on a chart. The gesture is a clear dismissal. As far as he is concerned, the primary patient, the baby, is gone. Now there is only the mother, the prisoner, to manage. He assumes nature will take its course. It is the grim, efficient calculus of wartime medicine. But Greta's training won't let her accept it. Bid, she pleads, the German word tumbling out. Please. There is, maybe, a chance. Miller looks at her then, and for the first time, he seems to see not just a German prisoner, but a terrified young woman. He hesitates. The rules are clear. The resources of this hospital are for the American personnel of the camp and for treating prisoners with routine, manageable conditions. A high-risk obstetric emergency involving a likely stillborn fetus is far outside that scope. He could send her back to her barracks with some calming words and let the inevitable happen. It would be the easiest thing to do. The logical thing. He turns to the American nurse standing in the doorway. Get Major Thompson, he says, his voice low but firm. Tell him it's an emergency. Tell him to meet me in my office. Now. He leaves the room without another glance at Greta. The door clicks shut behind him, leaving her alone in the sterile white room. She is stranded between two terrible possibilities, that they are abandoning her to her fate, or that they are about to attempt something far more terrifying. The silence that began in her womb has now enveloped her entire world. Captain John Miller walks quickly down the infirmary corridor, the polished floor reflecting the harsh overhead lights. His mind is racing. He is a doctor, trained to preserve life. He swore an oath. But that oath was written for a world at peace, not for a world where the woman in his examination room wears the uniform of an enemy who, just months ago, was trying to kill his countrymen. The Geneva Convention dictates that prisoners of war receive medical care, but how far does that obligation extend? Does it extend to a high-risk, experimental surgery for one of two patients who is almost certainly already dead? He enters the small, cluttered office of Major David Thompson, the camp's chief medical officer. Thompson is an older man, a career Army doctor from rural Georgia whose calm demeanor masks a core of unyielding pragmatism. He has been responsible for the health of thousands of German prisoners at Camp Ruston, dealing with everything from malnutrition from the front lines to outbreaks of influenza. He has seen it all, and he is not easily moved. Thompson looks up from a stack of supply requisitions as Miller closes the door behind him. What is it, John? The nurse said it was an emergency. Miller gets straight to the point. Sir, it's the pregnant prisoner. Hoffman. She came in this morning. No fetal movement for 48 hours. I can't find a heartbeat. Thompson leans back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He knew this day might come. So, fetal demise. It's tragic, but it's not uncommon. We'll monitor her. Nature will run its course in a day or two. It is the textbook answer, the logical and resource-efficient path. I'm not so sure, sir, Miller presses, his voice tight with urgency. She's at full term. If we wait for a natural delivery, the risk of sepsis for the mother is significant. She could die. Thompson's eyes narrow slightly. And what are you proposing, Captain? Here it is. The unthinkable choice. An emergency cesarean section, Miller says, the words hanging in the air between them. A heavy silence fills the office. Thompson stares at his subordinate, his expression unreadable. A cesarean section was a major abdominal surgery, still fraught with risk in 1945, even in the best civilian hospitals. Here, in a converted army barracks with limited blood supplies and a small surgical team accustomed to shrapnel wounds and broken bones, it was a monumental gamble. On a German prisoner, Thompson says, his tone flat. To deliver a baby that is, by your own assessment, already dead. We don't know that for certain, Miller counters, his own conviction growing as he speaks. The fetoscope isn't foolproof. There's a chance. A slim one, maybe. But there's a chance. And even if the baby is lost, the surgery gives the mother the best odds of survival. You are in the room with them now. You can feel the immense pressure of their decision. This is not a question of medicine alone. It is a question of humanity. Every instinct of war tells them to conserve their resources for their own. The blood plasma, the sulfa drugs, the sterile sutures, the time and energy of their skilled surgeon, these are assets of the United States Army. To expend them on the enemy is, in the cold logic of conflict, a betrayal of their primary mission. What if an American guard is critically injured while they are in surgery with a German prisoner? How would they answer for that? Thompson rises from his chair and walks to the window, looking out at the rows of barracks baking under the Louisiana sun. He sees the German prisoners in the distance, men who fought in Africa, in Italy, in Normandy. Men who followed Hitler. He thinks of the casualty lists he reads every week in the Stars and Stripes newspaper, the endless names of American boys killed in the Hurtgen Forest or the Ardennes. The hatred for the enemy is a tangible thing, a righteous fire that fuels the entire nation. And yet, he is a doctor. Before he was a major in the U.S. Army, he was a physician who swore to do no harm. He looks back at Captain Miller, a good doctor, a young man who hasn't yet had the idealism burned out of him. He sees the plea in Miller's eyes not just to save a patient, but to uphold the very principle they are supposedly fighting for. A principle that says some values, like the preservation of life, must stand above the divisions of war. The choice is his. He can follow the path of prudence and military logic, protecting his resources and accepting the inevitable loss of one, possibly two, enemy lives. No one would question it. It would be the safe, defensible decision. Or he can take an extraordinary risk, an act of radical compassion that defies the very nature of war. He can choose to see the patient, not the prisoner. He turns away from the window, his face set. The debate is over. His voice is quiet, but it carries the full weight of his command. John, he says. Scrub in. Get the surgical team ready. We're going to deliver a baby. The world has shrunk to a terrifyingly small space. For Greta Hoffman, it is the sterile white ceiling of the operating room, the sharp, clean smell of alcohol that burns her nostrils, and the masked faces of the American doctors looming above her. They are her enemies, the arbiters of her fate. Their language is a meaningless torrent of commands. Easy now, just breathe, we're going to take care of you, words she can only interpret through their tone, which is calm, focused, and utterly foreign. She has been stripped of her prisoner's uniform and draped in green surgical cloths, leaving only her swollen abdomen exposed under a brilliant, hot lamp. Fear is a cold knot in her chest. She is a nurse, she knows what is about to happen. She knows the risks of the anesthetic, the danger of hemorrhage, the specter of infection that haunts every operating theater. She says a silent prayer, not for herself, but for the child she never knew, a final, whispered goodbye into the void. An orderly holds a rubber mask over her face. The cloying, sweet smell of ether fills her lungs. She tries to fight it, to hold on to consciousness, but the world tilts and blurs. The faces above her dissolve into indistinct shapes. The sounds of the room, the clink of metal instruments, the rustle of gowns fade into a dull roar, and then, into absolute blackness. The moment she is under, the atmosphere in the room shifts. The quiet sympathy is replaced by a tense, professional urgency. Major Thompson and Captain Miller stand on opposite sides of the operating table. They have done this before, but not like this. Their usual work is patching up men torn apart by violence, setting bones, removing shrapnel, debriding wounds. This is different. This is not about repairing destruction, it is about bringing forth life from a place of near certain death. Scalpel, Thompson says, his voice muffled by his mask. He makes the first incision, a long, clean line across Greta's abdomen. The room is silent except for the hiss of the anesthesia machine and the quiet instructions passing between the surgeons and the nurse. They work with a synchronized efficiency born of long practice. Layer by layer, they cut through skin, fat, and muscle, their movements precise and economical. You can see the concentration etched around their eyes. There is no enemy in this room now. There are only doctors, a patient, and a life hanging in the balance. Finally, they reach the womb. It is dark, discolored, a sign of distress. Miller uses retractors to open the space, giving Thompson a clear view. This is the moment of truth. With extreme care, Thompson makes the final incision into the uterine wall. He reaches inside. The tension is unbearable. Every person in the room holds their breath. Thompson's hands work gently, freeing the small body from its silent prison. He lifts the baby out. It is a girl. And she is perfectly, terrifyingly still. Her skin is a waxy, bluish gray, her limbs limp. There is no cry. No gasp for air. No sign of life. A wave of collective disappointment washes through the room. It is what they expected, but the reality is a heavy, bitter blow. They have risked the mother's life for nothing. Thompson quickly clamps and cuts the umbilical cord and hands the lifeless infant to a waiting nurse. His focus immediately returns to Greta. "Let's get her closed up," he says, his voice grim. Suction. More sponges. The priority now is to save the one life they still can. But Captain Miller cannot look away from the baby. The nurse has placed her in a small basin and is about to cover her, to set her aside as a stillbirth. "Wait," Miller says, his voice sharp. He steps away from the operating table, stripping off his surgical gloves. "Let me see her." He takes the small, fragile body in his hands. He is a physician, but he is also a father of 2 young children back in Ohio. He knows what new life is supposed to look like, sound like, feel like. This is the absence of all of it. But as he looks at the baby girl's perfectly formed face, an instinct deeper than medical training takes over. He refuses to accept the silence. He lays her on a sterile cloth and, using a small rubber bulb, suctions the fluid from her nose and mouth. Nothing. He gently massages her chest, trying to stimulate the lungs. Still nothing. The operating room has fallen completely quiet. Major Thompson has paused his work, watching him. Everyone is watching him. Miller makes a decision. It is an old, almost primitive technique, a last resort. He holds the baby upside down by her ankles, supporting her head with his other hand. He gives her a firm, smart slap on the back. The sound of the slap echoes in the silent room. For a heart-stopping second, there is only the echo. And then, a sound. A tiny, pathetic noise, more like a kitten's mewl than a human cry. It is a gasp, a shuddering intake of air into lungs that have never known it. Her tiny chest heaves. Her limbs twitch. The ghastly blue color begins to recede from her skin, replaced by a blotchy, angry pink. The gasp turns into a weak, wavering cry. Then another, stronger this time. It is the most beautiful sound any of them have ever heard. It is the sound of a life that wore, and medicine, had already written off. It is the sound of a miracle, born of an enemy's hand. Greta surfaces from a deep, dreamless ocean of blackness. The first thing she registers is not sight, but sound. A thin, insistent cry. It is a sound from a life she thought was over, a memory of a hope she had already buried. She dismisses it as a phantom of the anesthesia, a cruel trick of a grieving mind. But the sound persists, growing stronger, closer. It is real. Her eyelids flutter open. The world is a blur of white. The harsh glare of the operating lamp is gone, replaced by the soft, indirect light of a recovery room. An American nurse, the same one from the infirmary, is standing by her bedside. The nurse's severe expression is gone, replaced by a gentle smile. In her arms, she holds a small bundle wrapped in a plain white blanket. The nurse steps forward and carefully places the bundle in the crook of Greta's arm. Greta looks down. Peeking from the blanket is a tiny, wrinkled face, a dusting of dark hair, and eyes squeezed shut as another cry escapes. It is her daughter. Alive. Warm and breathing against her skin. The world collapses into a single, overwhelming moment. Disbelief gives way to a flood of emotion so powerful it leaves her breathless. Tears stream down her face, not tears of grief, but of a joy so profound it feels like pain. She touches the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. Her baby. Her daughter. The enemy did not let her die. The enemy saved them. Both of them. A girl, the nurse says softly, her English words a bomb. You have a little girl. Greta looks up at the American woman, unable to speak. How do you thank someone for this? What words exist to bridge the chasm of language, nationality, and a world war? There are none. She can only offer a look of raw, unvarnished gratitude that transcends all barriers. The nurse simply nods, her eyes shining with an understanding that needs no translation. News of the Camp Ruston baby spreads like wildfire. It becomes a whispered legend among the German prisoners, a testament to something unbelievable. It is a crack in the monolithic wall of hatred that defines their world. The American doctors and nurses, who had been faceless captors, are suddenly revealed as something more. Major Thompson and Captain Miller check on her daily, their professional demeanor softened by a quiet pride. The guards, who once saw her with suspicion, now peer into her barracks with shy smiles, asking about the baby. American personnel donate spare clothes, a can of powdered milk, a hand-knitted blanket. Greta names her daughter Eva. A name that means life. In the strange, cloistered world of the POW camp, mother and child build a new reality. Greta's days are no longer marked by the monotonous camp routine, but by the rhythms of Eva's needs, feeding, sleeping, changing. The other German women rally around them, a collective of aunts fussing over the camp's only child. Eva's first smile, her first gurgling laugh, are celebrated victories, moments of pure, uncomplicated humanity in a place designed to contain the enemy. Weeks later, in early May, the news arrives. The war in Europe is over. The Reich has fallen. Germany has surrendered. For the other prisoners, it is a moment of profound uncertainty, of fear for the families they left behind in a ruined nation. For Greta, holding Eva, it feels distant. Her world is no longer defined by the rise and fall of armies, but by the small, warm weight in her arms. Months pass. The prisoners of Camp Ruston are slowly processed for repatriation. One day, Greta's name is called. She packs her few belongings, bundles up a healthy, thriving Eva, and walks out of the camp gates for the last time. She is no longer a prisoner returning to a defeated country, she is a mother, carrying the future. This single act of mercy, born in a Louisiana operating room, would echo for generations. Greta and Eva Hoffman returned to a shattered Germany and rebuilt their lives from the ashes. Greta would tell the story to her daughter, and Eva would tell it to her children, a family history founded not on a battle won or lost, but on a moment when doctors chose to be healers instead of soldiers. It is a story that poses a timeless question: in the midst of humanity's worst conflicts, when we are given every reason to hate, what are we capable of? The story of Greta and Eva reminds us that compassion is not a weakness, but a strength that can cut deeper than any blade. It proves that even behind enemy barbed wire, in the darkest hour of a global war, a single choice to affirm life can create a legacy of hope, a quiet cry of defiance against the silence of death.